We're very happy to bring back to the stage next Gavin Bade from Utility Dive, and he's going to conduct a discussion we're calling Conversation with the Commissioners. And it's an opportunity for you to hear some thoughts from the California Energy Commission, the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, and the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission, all in one format. So again, welcome back to the stage and back to the Energy Conference, Gavin Bade. Hello.
Well, excuse me, little morning mouth there. Hello and good morning, everyone. Aloha. Thank you for being here at this early morning session, and thank you to Doug and Aki for so fantastically kicking off this day. As Doug said, my name is Gavin Bade. I'm senior reporter at Utility Dive. We're an electric utility trade publication based in Washington, D.C. And this is my fourth time at the Hawaii Energy Conference, formerly the Maui Energy Conference. And I always love having the opportunity to come out here and talk about the clean energy transition. And the reason that I love to do that is just because this conference seems to attract people from not just all around the country, but all around the world, because people know that real things are happening with the clean energy transition here. Things are steel is getting put into the ground, people are making plans to get to 100%, and everyone wants to learn from it. I think what's really interesting about this conversation is that we'll have a chance for people in Hawaii to learn from other states and from other states to learn from Hawaii, because we've got kind of a case study comparison here in what we call our conversation with commissioners. So to my immediate right here is a familiar face to people in Hawaii. It's the chairman of your Public Utilities Commission, Jay Griffin. Thank you for being with us, Jay.
Good morning.
Morning. Next to him, we have the chairman of the California Energy Commission, Mr. David Hochschild. David, thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
And to his right, another familiar face to people here yesterday, it's Commissioner Abigail Anthony from Rhode Island. Thank you for being with us, Abigail. So to start this out, I just wanted to have each of the regulators up here give us a little lowdown on what's happened with their commissions recently, and give a little bit of background about what their commission does and where they're going in the future. So, Chairman Griffin, could you kick us off here?
Thanks, Gavin. Aloha and good morning, everyone. First off, it's an honor to be on stage with Gavin. I told him yesterday Utility Dive is required reading for me every morning. It's part of the way I keep up with events, and welcome to my colleagues from California and Rhode Island. I want to just take the chance here to offer a little bit of perspective. Our commission just ended on Monday what I think will be a historic string of decisions that we've issued over the past week. We issued 9 orders, 7 of them on Monday, and broadly speaking, I view this as a big step forward for clean energy in Hawaii. And categorically, they fall into 3 broad areas. On Monday, we approved 6 of the utility scale solar plus storage projects. And to me, the highlight was these are record-breaking proposals for our state, but also nationally. And we realized the significance of that, and we reviewed them in record time for our commission. In the past, some of our best projects had come from KIUC. We had reviewed those in 6 months. We found a way, in this case, by really rethinking our process to review these in just under 3 months. And I think that was with kind of no less diligence in doing it, but it really highlighted the value of these projects in bringing significant savings to customers on every island, ability to improve grid operations, and low-cost clean energy. And
no, Mr. Chairman, just for people who maybe aren't from Hawaii, you say these are from KIUC. This is the Kauai.
Sorry,
this is Kauai Co-op, correct?
Those were the earlier ones. These were for the Hawaiian Electric companies. So projects on Oahu, Maui Island, and Hawaii Island. Correct. So broad benefit across the state. So this was the first set of projects focused on renewable generation. On Monday also, we approved the phase 1 for Hawaiian Electric Company's grid modernization strategy. This has been something that has come in fits and starts over the past 10 years. A few years ago, the Commission actually rejected an earlier proposal and challenged the companies to really rethink this and have broader, more inclusive stakeholder input. I think our ability to move forward on that on Monday reflects the success of that effort. Just for the group, maybe 2 other elements. We had conditions in there to require data access and privacy policy at the front end of this process, as well as an advanced rate plan. my observation in other states, those kind of come on the back end of putting all the infrastructure in place, and to help really realize the value of the investment, we wanted to see that in place and go on in parallel. And the last piece, and also significant to me, we had 2 approvals last week for pilot rates for electric buses throughout the state. This will, I think, help unlock a lot of the investment, the interest from the county transit operators and the private tour bus operators. As well as, and of local interest here, we also approved with some conditions to help hand over the former JumpSmart Maui fast charger electric vehicle network. I think that has been a real success story locally, and our commission has tried to find a way forward in helping that project continue. And just with a little bit of indulgence from the panel, I really want to acknowledge our staff here. They've done historic work. The group working on the PPAs, I want to name them. A lot of them are in the audience here. So on our legal side, Jessica Friedman, Brandon Ito, Mark Kayetsu, Ashley Labasan, and their leader, Caroline Ishida. You'll see these names on the orders, but they were also the team leaders. And we really rethought on how we would work as a group and a team. And so they worked closely with our policy and research team. Winnie Groves, Kerwin Julian, Nikki Matsumura, Daniel Park, Samantha Ruiz, Anand Samtani, Clarice Schaefer, Jennifer Song, and their leader, Dave Parsons. And finally, they worked closely with our chief engineer, Maria Tomei. And so for me, it was an honor and privilege to see literally this group of people working nights, weekends. Our conference rooms in our commission were full around the clock. There's various teams working on these projects, but also the other orders that we've gotten out during this time frame. So I'm proud. So this was just a big step. We're lots of other issues before us that we've talked about, but this is our commission, I think, trying to work at its best.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman. And I think, at the risk of sacrificing my objectivity here, I think anyone that's worked with your staff at the Commission knows the professional and considered way that your staff conducts themselves. So, everyone in the sector appreciates that, and I'm sure they appreciate you acknowledging them. Chairman Hochschild, I want to turn to you next. We've got 2 PUCs up here on either side of you, but the California Energy Commission is a little bit of a different animal. Can you tell us, a little bit about your role there and what the CEC does and what you've done lately?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, and aloha, and good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here with my colleagues. And let me just first say a message to the people and the policymakers from the state of Hawaii. You don't have to be a big state to make a big difference. And I just want to tell you, the 100% law that you passed, we have now passed that, as you know, and I heard earlier someone say we're the 6th largest economy in the world. We actually were the 6th until Brexit, and now we're the 5th. It's passed, it's law in California, it's law in New Mexico, it's law in the District of Columbia. It's been introduced as legislation in another 8 states, and then another 4 on top of that have introduced legislation to study it. And this is going to roll out across the country. You guys set the pace on this. I can tell you with certainty it wouldn't have happened, certainly not this past year in California, but for Hawaii's leadership. So I just want to thank everyone here who's part of that. So just a little bit about the commission. We're a 700-person state agency in California. We enforce the renewable portfolio standard for all 43 publicly owned utilities in the state. We give out about $500 million a year for everything from electric vehicle infrastructure to energy efficiency retrofits and solar on public schools to R&D projects for the next wave of clean energy technologies. We set the building code for all new construction for energy. We just mandated solar on every new home in California starting this coming January 1st. We build about 120,000 homes a year in California, and we set appliance efficiency standards for things like televisions and computers and light bulbs. We just banned the incandescent light bulb last January in California. And we're doing a big push now on a number of other issues, including offshore wind and including lithium extraction in California. We have a big lithium reserve, enough to supply about 40% of the world's lithium demand, and that we should start to think about as the oil of the future, of the clean energy future. So I think it is a time to be really bold and ambitious, and the good thing about the moment that we're in, because there obviously are some dark winds blowing that we're all aware of, but the good thing is that in the United States, the way our system's set up, most of the policies that drive the clean energy future are actually made at the state level, and that's state RPS and interconnection and net metering and local permitting and state incentives and so forth. We can make a huge difference. And when I look at what our state, California, has been able to do, we have incubated the modern global solar industry started in California. The modern wind industry started in California. The electric vehicle industry started in California. The very first energy efficiency standards for buildings, for appliances started and spread. And what you guys are doing now in Hawaii, pushing the next wave of this, we have to have an expansive sense of possibility about how quickly change can occur. And just as an example, right, you think about Ford Motor Company, right, the landmark car company in the United States that started 115 years ago. Right, Tesla began in 2003. Tesla's more valuable than Ford, right? And so the change that we seek actually can happen much more quickly than conventional wisdom suggests, but that requires bold leadership at the state level. And so I'm really excited to partner with my colleagues and so many other good leaders around the country on pushing the next wave of progress.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Well, Commissioner Anthony, I want to turn to you next because you have a much different situation than your two companions up here on the panel, being from Rhode Island, a small northeastern state with less renewable energy potential, let's say, than California or Hawaii, which are baked in sun out here. Can you give us a little bit of the rundown on the clean energy transition in your state and how your commission is approaching it?
Sure. So, Rhode Island definitely is not as sunny as my skin can attest. It's like falling off of me right now. But we have, I think, no less aggressive goals and ambitions when it comes to a clean energy transition for the state of Rhode Island. As I mentioned yesterday, we have very aggressive, all cost-effective energy efficiency procurement statute, which is achieving, I think, over 2.5% savings annually, and that's in its 20th year or so. We have a robust feed-in tariff program for distributed generation and long-term contracts as well for renewables, including the nation's only offshore wind farm, and where there's several that are either on our desks or that we expect will be coming soon. But as I mentioned yesterday at the Commission, what we're really focused on is creating a framework for decision-making when it comes to guiding this clean energy transition in the most cost-effective way possible for the state. We have multiple programs across efficiency, renewable energy, electrification, and as commissioners, we want to make sure that we are advancing all of those programs and policies the most cost-effectively. So one of the things that we have done is we had a stakeholder process, and the result of that was the adoption of goals for our energy system, rate design principles, and a comprehensive cost-benefit framework that I mentioned yesterday. But I thought I would say a little bit more about the goals for our energy system because I think they reflect the Commission's just high-level approach to our clean energy transition. There's 10 of them, and I won't read them all, but here are a few that I think are indicative of how we're thinking about this transition. The first goal is that we should provide reliable, safe, clean, and affordable energy over the long term in covering all energy uses. And I think that actually gets into trickier questions, but it acknowledges that a lot of the emissions and money go to energy outside of our regulated system. We want to strengthen the Rhode Island economy, support economic competitiveness, and retain and create jobs by optimizing the benefits of a modern grid and attaining appropriate rate design structures. We want to prioritize and facilitate increasing customer investment in their facilities through efficiency, distributed generation, storage, demand response, electrification. where that investment provides recognizable benefits. And we want to appropriately compensate distributed energy resources for the value they provide to the electricity system, customers, and society, charge customers for the cost they impose on the grid, and compensate the utility for the services it provides. And finally, we want to align the distribution utility, customer, and policy objectives and interests through the regulatory framework, including through rate design, cost recovery, and incentive mechanisms. So we've set out, so those are our goals. We have rate design principles that are consistent with those goals. And we also have a cost-benefit framework that tries to capture a fuller range of the impacts of our electric system on customers, the power grid, and society. And that is a required component of any filing that impacts distribution rates that comes before us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that rundown. I want to get into some of the stickiest issues that we see at commissions as we deal with the clean energy transition here. And I think the one that looms largest over this conversation when we think about these commissions is often cost, right? I hear it all the time in Washington when we talk about renewable energy, we talk about the transition. Critics of the transition will rightly say, well, what is this going to cost consumers? Is this going to raise their power bill? Is it going to raise their tax bill if we are supporting certain technologies? I know this question looms large in each of your states. You each have pretty high retail rates compared to the U.S. average. And I wanted us to address this kind of sticky subject before we get into the more sunny parts of the transition. So Commissioner Anthony, I want to go back to you because you mentioned that cost-benefit analysis that you talked about yesterday. For folks who maybe weren't in the session, or just need them for a refresher, can you go back over a little bit some of those steps that you go through to evaluate what a cost-effective investment is in Rhode Island?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the cost-benefit framework that our commission has adopted acknowledges that the range of costs and benefits that are important to Rhode Islanders and relevant to the commission's decision-making is wider than the costs and benefits that are typically included in a cost-benefit analysis. The framework requires the proponents of any application to quantify or describe a wide range of costs and benefits, like I said, on the power system, on ratepayers, and society. And it includes impacts on climate change, poverty, health, innovation, economic development, and national security. The first challenge that the commission is having with this framework is getting proponents to use it. Simply that a lot of the proponents or the applicants are not yet comfortable or familiar with how to quantify different costs and benefits, unclear of what the direction of an impact is. If you make if you make this investment on the grid, what is it going to do? What are the downstream effects, and how will that ultimately play out? So we're looking for direction in magnitude, and ultimately as precise a quantification as possible. We recognize that in many cases, quantification isn't possible, and we're looking for a qualitative assessment of these impacts. But the second challenge, I think, is one that I'm sure other regulators and commissioners face as well, which is that how do we think, as economic regulators of the utilities, how do we think about societal benefits in regulatory decision-making? So many of the benefits of the clean energy transition may be avoided costs that electric ratepayers are currently causing, but they're not paying for, such as air quality improvements. But other avoided costs may fall largely outside the electric system, and proponents are asking utility regulators to internalize those within our electric system. And so how do we think about those societal benefits? So for example, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from our oil heat customers in Rhode Island, or from our transportation drivers, cars. Those are all externalities that are currently being caused by the transportation sector or our oil heat sector. But by asking the electric utility to, say, invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or to incentivize the utility to pursue electric heat transformation, we're seeking to internalize those externalities in the sector that was not causing them. And so I don't think there's a straightforward, I think commissioners are thinking about that in lots of different ways, and I'm chewing it over as well.
Absolutely. Chairman Hochschild, I want to turn to you next. How do you think about customer cost from your vantage point at the head of the Energy Office, and how are you using, your considerable funding and the levers that you can pull to limit the costs to California customers?
So first, I would draw a distinction between energy rates
Yep.
or energy bills and energy rates. So
Sure.
our electric rates are higher than the national average. Our monthly bills are lower. And the reason is that the first priority on our loading order is energy efficiency. So we do things like in 2009, we set the efficiency standards for televisions. And what we said to the entire television industry, you can't sell your product to our 40 million customers unless you comply with this strict standard. Cut the energy use of televisions in half, saves $1 billion a year. And by the way, because we're a large state, what typically happens for many of those appliance manufacturers is they don't just upgrade their manufacturing line for the California market. It doesn't make sense to do that. Do it for the whole country, in some cases for the whole world. We did that for computers, we did that for lighting, and so we are pushing very hard along those lines. We're also investing in R&D for the next wave of clean energy technologies. My view is that we are headed to a world that's going to have 1 cent a kilowatt hour solar and 1 cent a kilowatt hour wind. I got in the solar industry 20 years ago. It was 50 cents a kilowatt hour. We had their first bid this past summer come in at under 2 cents. I just was doing a wind visit in Oklahoma last week. They are now at 1.13 cents a kilowatt hour for wind in Oklahoma. And there's more cost reduction to come on these technologies that will come faster if we invest in R&D, which we're doing. The other thing I would say is that as we electrify, say, for example, the transportation fleet, that has a downward effect on rates because I don't know what your ratio is here in Hawaii, but I imagine it's something similar to what we have in California, where basically 2/3 of the cost per kilowatt hour is the transmission distribution cost. So it's fixed, okay? As you get new electric demand from electric vehicles and more money coming in that was going to the oil industry and now comes in electric, it actually has a downward, you're spreading those costs over more kilowatt hours. And that's why it's another benefit of greening our transportation fleet. And it's an important part of our strategy long term.
Absolutely. And I think the power that California has to set these efficiency standards, not just for appliances, but for even larger things, is not to be underestimated, right? Like, this is a big policy debate between California and the National Environmental Protection Agency right now over automobiles, because you guys have set very ambitious standards for zero-emission vehicles and auto emission standards. Obviously, the EPA wants to roll back the federal ones, and now they are fighting with you guys because what do the automakers say? Well, if we have to build a more efficient vehicle for California, we're just going to do it for the entire U.S. because it's such a big economy. So yeah, we see the ripple effects of California's policy, in Washington and across the nation.
And I would just say, the stakes are very high now. I mean, Trump's Department of Energy is proposing eliminating Energy Star, which is crazy. It's crazy. And so this is why state leadership on this stuff, and we have to kind of step in and fill the gaps that are being left in our federal policy landscape.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like, a lot of the takeaway from the California experience here is that as clean energy gets cheaper, a lot of the solution to these cost issues is more clean energy, right? And there's, issues that we could get into and how to balance the grid, but that also seems to be kind of the takeaway message in Hawaii, right, Chairman Griffin, is that, as we move forward in time, these options are just getting cheaper and cheaper.
Absolutely. I mean, we see the path forward. I do want to touch on the appliance standards. We have a bill, I think, still moving through. I believe the hearing's up today, tomorrow. This will be a chance where we're going to follow your lead. The state's trying to basically point to the California code. We've been working with the other state stakeholders in kind of aligning our side. So thanks for your leadership on that. We're going to try and pull our weight on it. But back to your point, Gavin. I mean, absolutely. What actually didn't come up, I don't think, at all yesterday. We are the state with the highest rates. It's been a persistent challenge. When I came onto our commission in 2012, we were at a period of record high oil prices and extremely high electricity rates. It's a really uncomfortable place to be. People want quick answers, and unfortunately, there's not really easy, quick answers. So I kind of keep that experience with me the whole time in this job, and it really motivates me, and kind of the word that follows through all the time is urgency. We have a need urgency in the state to address our problems of oil dependence and fossil fuel dependence, and cost is a key driver. I mean, clean energy we've seen these most recent projects, the opportunity to deliver significant savings, and I think, again, this is just going to be the lead of it. So, I approach this with urgency for that need, for our ability to improve our security resilience. It was a very personal experience last year when we had a Category 5 and 4 hurricane approaching the islands, packing up my family, not knowing where we're going to go. How are we going to sustain ourselves if the worst impacts hit? And we see in our neighborhood, we see the effects of climate change. So that's all of these are kind of the motivators to me, and why in our situation in particular, urgency is the word that I keep trying to bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. It's a balance, though, right? I mean, just you talking right now brings to mind a particular case where you had to consider customer cost, and you said you touched on it earlier, the rejection of Hawaiian Electric's grid modernization proposal, right? This was a couple years ago. You sent them back to the drawing board and said this is too costly. You have to come back and find a way that's not going to raise rates. And you came back, and this was one of the orders that you touched on at the beginning of the panel here, was you approved their next one. Just quickly, what changed between the original plan and this one that allowed you guys to say, yeah, we'll give this one approval?
Yeah, so I say all that understand there's significant opportunities for savings, but will also require significant investment across the board. And, we viewed this, I've always viewed, investment in the grid, modernization of the grid as part of the foundation that will help get us to the clean energy future. So there's need to incur costs there. So I think Commissioner Anthony did an excellent job explaining the types of frameworks that we go through. It's always a challenge as a commission. We usually don't have all the information, and we don't necessarily have all the information in the time frame that we want. So we're working at, how do we best balance those costs, and who bears the risk of a lot of these investments. So I think we have a greater level of comfort when we find ways that we feel comfortable that the costs have been minimized as much as they can, and we find ways to share risk. That was a centerpiece of our ability to move forward and approve the EV charging infrastructure here. I think some of the aspect for the grid modernization was both, asking the utility to go back, rebid the contracts. Another aspect was a more proportional rollout, which a lot of people were opponents of, and frankly, we'll see if that works better or not. But I think on this topic, it's been a challenge for commissions across the country for a while. To address them, and in our case, again, we've needed the investment, and at a certain point, you have to find a way to say yes.
As Commissioner Anthony, it looks like you have something to say on this.
I do. I just want to. I think I've told Chair Griffin this, but I've drawn inspiration from him and the courage to say no to proposals because they're not good enough, and they're not good enough for our ratepayers. And I think that. At least for me, that has taken some courage. What I sense from the stakeholders and the proponents that come before our commission is the urgency to address the challenge of climate change, and I don't deny that urgency. And there's a frustration and enthusiasm that we need to get going. We need to do things faster. And in that combination of frustration, excitement, enthusiasm, I fear that stakeholders, utilities, proponents in front of us lose sight of the standard of review for the commission. And I actually think that it's all the more important that when the utility is being used as a vehicle to advance public policy goals, that both regulators and stakeholders need to ask even more questions than they normally would, and to demand an even higher level of evidentiary quality than they normally would. We need to be seeking evidence that the utility is the appropriate and advantageous vehicle to advance a public policy, and not just the easiest. And when the driver for the investment or the proposal is the clean energy transition or grid modernization or really anything else, the parties now that have a stake in the outcome are much broader than just the utility. It's all of you who have a stake in the outcome of what the utility is proposing. should be very clear about what you as stakeholders, what your expectations are, what you want, what is needed to achieve those goals, and be confident that the utility shares your expectations. Because if you're just encouraging your regulators to approve a proposal or investment that seems directionally correct and hoping that the details will get sorted out later, there's a good chance that they won't and that you won't get what you thought you were going to, and the money will be spent and gone. And so I think doing that legwork upfront to make sure that you have high quality proposals, that you know what they're going to result in, and that you can hold the utility accountable to is even more important when it comes to issues around the clean energy transition than even before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're all talking about a central subject here in each of the states, which is the role of the utility in the clean energy transition. And I think we all know that utility is going to have a central role, not just in cleaning up power generation, but also electrifying the rest of other industries. But we see that utility business models across the nation are also under stress, or at least going through a transition. So I want to bring up that subject now and turn to you first, Chairman Hochschild. Obviously, the utilities in California are under significant stress from the wildfire risk, one in particular, but they also see a lot of other challenges when it comes to, all of the real-time energy prices this week have been in the negatives in California because of all the solar generation at midday. There's low load, it's springtime, So how do you see, the evolving role of the utility given all of these concurrent pressures on them?
Well, it is true that we've had much more innovation in clean technology than we have in utility business models. Although one thing that's happened in California is the introduction of these community choice aggregators, of which we have, I think, 19 now that are just sort of doing the retail service and are, in some cases, asking some very provocative and creative questions. Can we actually have people buy electric vehicles through their electric bill and finance it that way and so forth? And so there's some experimentation going on, which I think is healthy. But no, we have a very unique circumstance right now going on in California where climate change is making it harder to fight climate change in the sense that these fires have created a bankruptcy threat and we could have electric rates go up as a consequence of that, and that makes it then less affordable to get an electric vehicle, for example. And so that's something we're working through now. We do have a pretty unique circumstance in the state in that the liability law, as it works now, places heavy burden on electric utilities and their electric ratepayers, that's something I think is sort of the first order business for our governor on energy now, is looking at that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to turn to you next, Chair Griffin. We've seen a lot of different developments over the past few years with Hawaiian Electric. Some opportunities that they could have been bought out. We saw the commission, reject one of those, and now they have a big investment from a hedge fund, from a private equity firm that has kind of buoyed them for a little while. How do you see this company going forward? And do you think that, I know this is a fraught question for you, but what is the role in the structure of the utility going forward in the clean energy transition?
Can I bring our chief counsel up?
Guest spots, cameos are totally acceptable. Representative
Lee,
if you want to make if you want to, yeah.
Well, let me tackle that in two parts. Again, I go back. Our governor was up here on stage yesterday saying, he set the path, set the vision, and I think my interpretation of that, he's also lets the commission do its work, and it's up to us to figure out the details and work with the stakeholders here. He's also very clear that he sees, we have a huge challenge here and there's a big role for everybody. And so in one of the, our largest docket is the performance-based regulation initiative that the panel did a great job yesterday talking about. Commissioner Potter went through some of the details of the very next steps. And so, when I look back and, look at that broadly, 10 years ago when the White Clean Energy Initiative started, there was kind of a quid pro quo there, that utilities got decoupling and some capital investment mechanisms, and they agreed to sign on to lower renewable targets then. We've set our ambition high, the level and rates of change, we've gone to the next step. And so this initiative is really, our ability to step back and look at the regulatory framework more broadly, in particular, figure out and try and address where some of the friction points are that may be slowing down our pace of progress here. And so we've spent the past year with a very involved professional stakeholder engagement process that culminated in a staff report that was issued earlier this year, that's out for comment now. And our commission will rule on that and set kind of the guidelines and the outline for the detailed regulatory reform work that'll take place in the next year. And again, I think I go back to what our governor said, is, the direction is clean energy economy, and we need the ability to attract capital of all types, and utility needs to be functional. I mean, we watch very closely what happens in California. And, President Picker, in one of his interviews that I heard several months, actually shortly after the 100% law, he said their ability to address that wasn't even in his top 5 challenges. A lot of these other issues moved to the forefront, and so we need to, keep out of that type of situation, and so we can keep focused on the clean energy push here.
Just quickly, one more on this. From a financial and a managerial standpoint, do you believe Hawaiian Electric is, as it's constituted today, able to deliver on Hawaii's clean energy goals?
Well, I mean, we're making progress. So I think it's, so the short answer is yes. I think what the question is, can we improve? And so I think what I go back to are where can we look to address these friction points and have the win-win-win that our governor was talking about?
A very tough question and a very judicious answer from the chairman here. I appreciate the I appreciate the indulgence from you.
Caroline, you're supposed to be up here.
I wanted to, take the heat off for a second and turn to another sticky subject, though, and that is the role of natural gas in this transition. I think in each of the states represented up here, it's a big issue what role natural gas will play as we move toward a completely clean energy economy. Commissioner Anthony, I want to turn to you first. We hear a lot about pipeline constraints, natural gas issues all around New England, and I'm sure that you guys have robust electrification goals as well. How do you see the issue of natural gas? Is it a bridge? How long is that bridge? How do you look at it in Rhode Island?
As people may be familiar, that a lot of the conversation about natural gas in New England has been focused on the interstate level and state proposals for interstate pipeline to increase the capacity to bring gas into our region, not only for power generation. A large majority of our power generation is natural gas, but also for heating. And so that has dominated the natural gas conversation in our region for a number of years. There wasn't going to be a real conversation about alternatives to increasing pipeline capacity until the traditional solution was rejected. It is now, I would say, off the table that there's going to be increased interstate pipeline capacity coming into New England, and now we can talk about alternatives. And I think that's generally my orientation to this issue, is to look at problems from the demand side first rather than the supply side. And like I said, we have very robust energy efficiency programs, demand response, and that we should be focused on finding alternatives on the demand side to meet our fuel security concerns. But I actually spend a lot more time thinking about the role of the gas company and the role of natural gas on the distribution side rather than the wholesale side. I am increasingly frustrated that when it comes to electrification, we get a lot of intervention and a lot of parties and a lot of advocates who come into our electric dockets to promote electrification and ask for increased incentives for electric heat or electric vehicles, more infrastructure for electric heat in our electric dockets and our electric energy efficiency dockets, infrastructure dockets. But then when we turn to the gas company and the gas dockets, and it's crickets. And we don't hear those same arguments. So while the environmental externalities that the stakeholders and the advocates are trying to reduce are coming from the gas side of the business, there seems to be a lack of interest in intervening and trying to pursue that issue from the gas side. So, for example, we just decided we have an annual gas infrastructure docket that we just decided. This particular one had a significant proposal to expand the gas distribution network in Rhode Island, which would allow a significant number of customers to switch from oil heat to gas. It would provide a lot more gas to some commercial customers. And this is a 40, 50, 60-year investment, enormous. And we had no parties who were addressing the issue or asking questions about electrification alternatives to this major gas expansion. The commission can push, and we can ask some questions about, did you explore electrification? Would it be more cost effective than building out the gas distribution network? But when there's no counterparties coming in and trying to make that record and make that argument, it makes it a pretty heavy lift for the commission to say outright reject that gas expansion. So I think that as a commission and at the regulatory and at the legislative level, there's a few things that we need to be doing. We need to actually decouple our gas company on a revenue basis. Right now, our gas company is just decoupled on a per customer basis, so they still have an incentive to add new gas customers. And on the electric side, our total revenue is decoupled, so the incentive to add electric load is a little blunted. It's still there, but it's not as strong as it would be. Much stronger incentive to add gas customers than to add electric load. Then we also need to start looking at shorter and realistic amortization periods for gas infrastructure. They're now amortized over 33 years. We need to be looking at 10 years, 15 years, a lot shorter. And I think that by reflecting the cost of the life within the context of meeting our climate change goals, it will make electrification look a lot more cost effective. And finally, I think I would encourage advocates in our state to go to the legislature, internalize the cost of carbon from our gas and oil systems, or enable the commission to do so.
So that's a pretty clear call for a price on carbon in Rhode Island from one of the commissioners there. And is that clear?
I think it would help address these issues that I'm struggling with, as using the electric system to achieve all our policy goals, putting all of the costs on electric ratepayers, it doesn't make sense from an economic perspective, and we're not totally empowered to do that either. So we either need to be empowered to do that from the legislature, or yes, to put the cost of carbon on oil and gas.
It's not an uncommon call that I hear from regulators, not just on the state level, but the federal level as well. The lack of a way to quantify a cost for carbon emissions is really tripping the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission up right now, for instance, when they consider pipelines or liquefied natural gas export facilities. The Democrats want to quantify the significance of these emissions to climate change, and the Republicans don't want to. They can't come to an agreement because they don't have a price on carbon. Now, maybe the Republicans wouldn't want to do it anyway, but that's a big sticking issue. So sticking point on that issue. So I think it's a broad thing. It's not just endemic to Rhode Island. Chair Hochschild, I want to turn to you next. We know that California is really trying to get off of natural gas, not just for electric generation, but also when it comes to end use as well. And there are debates about renewable gas there and how the state should approach it. What's your perspective on natural gas, a bridge, and if so, how long is it?
So one of the final things that Governor Brown did before he finished his term in January was he issued an executive order for the state to get to carbon neutrality and eventually to be carbon negative by 2045. So that's the path we're on. In California, executive orders have the force of law until the next governor makes a change, and I don't expect any change to that from Governor Newsom, who's just as, if not more, committed on the issue of climate. We have tripled the amount of renewable energy we have in California in the last 10 years. We're at 34% now, not counting large hydro. You add large hydro, we're almost half from renewables, and of course we have one nuclear plant remaining, and you add that, we're almost 60% carbon-free today, and climbing. When you look at the challenge just to getting to 100%, I really don't think it's hard to get to 80%. I think it's very doable. I think 90% is hard. I think 100% is very hard, but all doable. There's nothing about the challenge of getting to 100% that's outside the realm of a solvable problem. It's just different types of problems, but this is all solvable.
And you mean electric generation?
I'm talking about
clean electric generation.
Correct. And the point to keep in mind with all this stuff is we need to remember our ability to transform markets is very powerful. Okay, so the cost of solar, as I said 20 years ago, was 50 cents a kilowatt hour. We're now down in the 2 to 3 cent range. The same thing is happening in wind, and the same thing is happening with storage. So energy storage was $1,000 a kilowatt hour in 2010. Now let's call it 130 to 150, falling fast, and that's going to be a key piece. But we now have more pollution coming from our buildings burning natural gas than our entire natural gas power plant fleet in California. Okay, so that's why we are doing a big focus on building decarbonization, building electrification. I just got rid of my gas water heater. I got an electric heat pump water heater about a year ago. It's working great. It's cheaper to operate. And we've seen a lot of technology development in the area of all electric new construction. So the largest home builder in the United States doing all electric new homes is a company called City Ventures. They do mostly urban infill housing in San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, et cetera. I just visited one of their new home developments, all electric, no gas lines. They're getting no complaints at all from their new homeowners. People love the induction cooktops, the whole thing, and you don't have a gas bill. And that also saves roughly $5,000 a home, which is the avoided cost of not having to run gas pipes in your house, and even more if you do it with the whole community, so you don't even have to run the gas distribution infrastructure. And there's things like you don't need a CO2 monitor in your home if you have an all-electric home. So these things. And so we are lucky to be right now at a point where the technology has evolved to where there are very high-quality alternatives, and it's possible to do this kind of construction.
You just made me double take so hard. Could you repeat that statistic you said about building natural gas emissions versus generators?
Yeah, more pollution coming from combustion of natural gas in buildings in California than our entire natural gas power plant fleet.
That to me is something that I had no idea about, and is amazing.
Yeah, and by the way,
to me.
that's a function. Just to be clear, it's not that everyone is using suddenly more gas in buildings. It's just we have cleaned up the electric sector so much.
Absolutely. And
yeah.
Is this just talking about carbon emissions, or are we also talking about fugitive methane? I mean, we're complicating the discussion a little bit, but
Well, fugitive methane would be a factor for both buildings, getting gas to buildings or getting gas to pipeline. So no, it's really GHG emissions from power plants and from buildings. But I do want to touch on the fugitive emission issue, because I think my own view is that the science now is very clear. Fugitive emissions are a major threat. And we have 2 million wellheads in the United States. There's a lot of leakage at the wellheads. There's leakage in the transmission system, leakage in the distribution system, and there's leakage in our homes. So your gas water heater in your house typically exhausts about 0.5% of the gas up the flue. That is like a leak, right? It doesn't combust with 100% efficiency, and we need to recognize that. And so from a greenhouse gas perspective, not from a particulate emissions perspective, but from a GHG perspective, I think today gas is on par, if not worse, than coal, because methane is 82 times more potent than CO2, and there's as I said, all this leakage. So just the fugitive emission piece alone is a major problem.
Absolutely, and I can't stop thinking about that building statistic. I think that people, don't have an understanding about how much emissions really actually comes from the building stock. But we do have to move on in the interest of time here. I want to turn to you, Chairman Griffin. I have a number of questions in here from the audience asking about. No, I'm going to pick it, but. But I mean, but it's another toughie for you. Talking about Hawaii gas, and why they are not subject to the RPS, and should they be integrating more renewable gas into their system? Basically, how do you think about that as the commission chair here?
Sure. This has been a conversation's gone on for several years and fairly hot topic in our legislative session. I mean, our testimony has been that the commission will take direction from the policymakers on if there's a need to set a renewable portfolio standard. I think we also said I actually I worked on staff when the electricity one was written, and so part of the perspective there was to set a target, get some experience. So to me, that informed our testimony. But we'll take the direction. Same time, I mean, we have had a promising renewable gas proposal that we approved with the wastewater treatment plant on Oahu. Certainly seems like there's more opportunity out there. And this was a proposal that actually saved money also. So I think the state's direction is clear, and I think there'll be continued interest on all these sectors decarbonizing.
Absolutely, but I know that the renewable gas question is controversial both here and in California, because some activists see it as a way that they see it as greenwashing from the gas company. They put a small amount of renewable gas into the system, they get great headlines about it, but they still get to keep their infrastructure, they still get to keep importing fossil fuels into Hawaii or piping them into California. How do you see that issue?
Sure. I mean, I don't take what has happened so far as greenwashing. I mean, I think it was a legitimate effort by the company, partnership with the city and county of Honolulu. So I think the question is how many more opportunities out there, and how aggressive are we going to be about going after them?
Chairman, Commissioner, do you guys have any feelings on renewable natural gas? I know that this is a big conversation in California right now as well, with Southern California Edison.
Yeah, so I think it's clearly better than conventional natural gas, but the question is, can you credibly get to 100% renewable natural gas in order to comply with the executive order? And there is no technology pathway for that I see. And so that's where these decisions have to be made. At what point do you focus on electrification and not maintaining two energy distribution systems in certain areas? I mean, this has to be done very thoughtfully. But I just returned from visiting Paradise, California, where the fire happened, and obviously the electric system was destroyed, the gas system was destroyed. That's at the very, very end of the distribution network, and PG&E employees were telling me, this does not make sense to rebuild the gas infrastructure at this far. I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's really expensive service to install and maintain, and if you can do it all electric, and customers are happy with the performance of those appliances, which is what the results have been. That to me is a strategic place to begin.
And I get indeed there's some question on whether they should rebuild the electric transmission infrastructure out to some of the most remote places, right? Or whether they should just microgrid, to mitigate the fire risk of the transmission line. So I think this is an ongoing question.
Yeah, certainly if it's up to the utility, they don't want to have to do this. I mean, this is the most expensive service in terms of getting the power out there, maintaining it, cutting all the trees. I mean, it's a much better business just to serve dense cities. But they're required by law to do that.
Yeah, we've just got a couple minutes left here, but I really want to touch on the transportation issue before we leave here, because for all of the issues in decarbonizing the electricity sector, it seems like the easy part when you take a step back, right? We kind of know what to do. You take emitting sources off of the grid, you put non-emitting sources on the grid, you find a way to balance it, right? Well, I look at that and I see a plan. I look at the transportation sector and I see a much harder nut to crack. President Picker from the CPUC from California was up here yesterday, and he said, we don't even know what we're aiming at. Are we aiming at an autonomous fleet vehicle future where most things don't have a driver and most people don't own cars? Or are we aiming for a replication of the individual ownership model? Or is it going to be something in between and vary between different metropolitan areas and different densities? This is a big, big open question, and there's a lot to it. But how are you guys thinking about pushing electrification in your states? Chair Hochschild, it looks like you have something right on the tip of your tongue.
Look, I think we do know what we're aiming at initially, which is electrification. So 99.5% of the zero-emission vehicles that came on the market last year in California were electric or plug-in battery electric vehicles. We have 500,000 electric vehicles on the road today. In January, we hit 25,000 a month. And I'm sure some of you saw the news out of Germany this past week. Daimler, VW, BMW all announced they are going electric as their future. Volvo's announced they're stopping the internal combustion engine. They're just going to be doing electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. So the drop in cost that we're seeing for lithium-ion batteries is a huge factor in this. That's about half the cost of an electric vehicle. I've been driving an electric vehicle for the last 2 years, a Chevy Bolt, which I love, 238-mile range. I see my friend Chris Lee here in the front, just texted me a picture of his new electric car, Tesla, on the way. California car, by the way. The good news is, the quality of the vehicles that are available is excellent now. There's 45 different models of electric vehicles on the market in California, and pretty much every manufacturer now in the world has or is developing electric vehicle. And by the way, there's great advantages just for the consumer in that electric vehicles are very reliable. The servicing on an electric car is every couple of years your tires rotated. And there's just 90% fewer components, and they're fast. We're actually looking at it even for potentially buying electric cars for our highway patrol in California. And the nice thing is that they can help with renewable energy integration, and we need that. You can be intelligent about your charging protocols. We did a pilot project with the Air Force, installed 43 electric vehicles that are plugged into the grid and actually can be sort of a clean peaker and feed power into the grid when they need. So there's all kinds of exciting potential there. But I think this is, probably the thing I'm most excited about in the next chapter here is how quickly we can push on vehicle electrification. What we do need is the infrastructure, and that's the getting enough chargers. And you need a goal. So we have a 250,000 charger goal by 2025. We are not on a path to get there. We're at 19,000 right now, and that's a big area where I'm going to be focusing a lot of energy, because right now in California it's our #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, but also it's our #1 source of air pollution from a health perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I know the electric vehicle issue is a tough nut to crack in California. It's probably even tougher in other states because you guys have the advantage of having clear policy goals for chargers, for electric vehicle numbers. It's harder in a state where, if the utility comes and asks you, we want to build out charging stations, as a regulator, you have to ask yourself, is this going to be used and useful? Are the electric vehicles going to be there to plug in? Commissioner Anthony, you are nodding your head at that takeaway there. How do you look at this electric vehicle issue in your state?
Yeah, so our commission received a number of utility proposals with respect to electric vehicles and electric heat last year. We ultimately approved a demand charge holiday or a demand charge discount for level 3 charging, for fast charging. We approved time of use rewards pilot for electric vehicle drivers, and we approved a significant slug of make-ready work or interconnection work for the utility to make the system ready for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We rejected utility ownership of the charging stations themselves. The utility had proposed a model in which they would own some charging stations in certain locations. But again, the proposal didn't really meet the standard of review. It didn't overcome the barriers that the utility was purporting that it would. So we rejected utility ownership of the charging infrastructure. The competitive market can deliver that, in my opinion. We also rejected a number of performance incentive mechanisms or shareholder rewards that the utility was seeking to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles and electric heat. In my analysis, and what led me to reject these performance incentive mechanisms, shareholder rewards, is that the electric utility has inherent shareholder incentives to accelerate and promote electrification within our regular cost of service model. They earn their rate of return on equity in their infrastructure investments, in the make-ready work. They would benefit from increased sales, increased cash flow. Even though they are decoupled, they still really benefit from increased sales. It's that cash flow element that their shareholders like. So because they have inherent incentives within the regulatory model to accelerate and promote electrification, both of vehicles and heating, the case for why they needed an extra shareholder reward was not clear to me. The reason why I think some perceive our utilities to be sluggish in promoting electrification are also unclear to me, although I think it probably does have something to do with being a combined electric and gas company, where the incentives to build out the gas distribution network to add gas customers are stronger than the incentives to add on the electric side.
Absolutely. Well, we are going a little bit over time here, but Chairman Griffin, I would be remiss if I didn't allow you to address your commission's EV charging operations here in your recent decision. So give us the lowdown real quick here, and then I'll close this out.
Sure, I'll try to be short and to the point. And also, our family's been driving a new Leaf for 2 months. I think it's a great car, and to me, it speaks to me that this is a compelling consumer alternative to the future. We have Point Electric companies have put forward an electrification and transportation strategy. We haven't formally weighed in yet, but I mean, that was a broad stakeholder effort. I think they have taken initiative and leadership here. The first 2 proposals, as I talked about earlier, we signed off on, and I think it partly reflects, to me, a focus on fundamentals also. Getting the pricing models right, I think helps unlock the investment. That was, to me, kind of the key part of this electric bus charging tariff, and I mean, to me, this is the fuel. So if we can make the fuel more competitive to the alternative and help also with our renewable integration and cost challenges, there's just perfect synergy here. So that's a key part.
Yeah, one final point just on where charging technology is going, right? We want an experience that's as close to going to the gas station as possible. So Electrify America, from the VW settlement, just got through earlier, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, a new charger, 350 kW charger through UL that does 20 miles of charge in 1 minute. So 100 miles in 5 minutes, 200 miles in 10 minutes, which is an experience that's really not different than going to the gas station. And as you think about what are the barriers to adoption, right, having to wait for a long time to get your car recharged, for some people it's a real issue. And that's a very solvable problem.
Wow, the chairman coming through with the eyebrow-raising statistics at this panel. I keep doing double takes. That's an incredible statistic. 20 miles in 5 minutes. That's incredible. We are well over time here, and I want to close us out with a quick lightning round. So let's do this. 2030. Give me your estimations for the power sector. Percentage renewables in your state. Percentage clean, if that's different, and percentage of electric vehicles. They were not prepared for this. This is not our closing question.
I can start. So our law requires 60% renewable energy by 2030. I think we'll be closer to 70%. Our goal is 5 million electric vehicles. I think it's going to be a bell curve, and I think we'll be above that, but I don't know quite how far. No.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Look, our track record, we've been ahead and above our goals to date. I think all the signs are we're going to continue on that. We have multiple islands well above. So my answer is way higher than it is now, but I'm not going to pick a number.
It's all right, Chairman. Commissioner?
Our governor has a goal of 1,000 megawatts of clean energy. I think we'll be we are on our way to meeting that. I think we'll have surpassed that. And if we included energy efficiency in that, we would be blowing it out of the water. So.
Well, thank you all so much. Let's have a hand for this Class A panel.